Good morning, Morai Rabotai, Bruchim Habayim. We are continuing on Masechet Succah, and we are on Daf Mem Zayin, Amud Aleph, 16 lines down from the top of the Amud. Today's Amud is being learned as a Schut Refuah Shelema for Rachel Bat Edna, for Michael Ben Nahid, Esther Bracha Bat Chaya, Rabbi Avraham Ben Tashgol, especially for Refuah Shelema of Rachel Simcha Bat Nahid, all have Refuah Shelema, Toch Shar Cholei Yisrael, Amen. This Amud is also being learned as a Schut for the Neshama of Jacqueline Bat Avraham and Ardas. This week's learning of the community has been graciously dedicated by the Dayan family, Cohen family, and Shei families. It should be an ultimate schut for all their mishpachot. Amen. So the Gemara says, Amar Rabbi Yochanan. The discussion that we had before now is switching to a new topic of Shehyanu on Chag HaSukkot versus Shmini Atzeret. Now, unlike Chag HaPesach, that really has part 1 and part 2, Chag HaSukkot doesn't have part 1 and part 2 necessarily, even though that we call Shmini Atzeret the 8th day, which would indicate that this is the 8th day of Chag HaSukkot. Really, Shmini Atzeret, as we will see, is a Chag Bifnei Atzmo, is a Yom Tov of its own. And hence, any Yom Tov gets its own Shechianu, and the Gemara is going to discuss whether or not the Shmini Atzeret is different enough from Chag HaSukkot. Again, there is the shared elements. It's called Shmini. The Bayom HaShmini is the 8th day, so obviously it's connected to Chag HaSukkot. But is it different enough and separate then Chag HaSukkot in a sufficient way to say its own Shehyanu, or maybe it's not? So we're going to compare it with Chag HaSukkot and see the differences, and we're going to also contrast that with Chag HaPesach, having the first half and second half, which we don't say Shehyanu for sure, and try to understand how that works. It says the Gemara, Amar Rabbi Yochanan, Omrim Zman B'Shmini Shel Chag, we do say Zman, whenever the Gemara says Zman, we're talking about Birkat Shehyanu, right? We say Birkat Shehyanu on the 8th day on Shmini Atzeret, but we do not do that on Shvi Shel Pesach. They said, Teda, I'll prove it to you, that Shmini Atzeret has 3 fundamental differences from Chag HaSukkot. The 3 mitzvot of Chag HaSukkah that are the defining factors of Chag HaSukkot do not even exist in Shmini Atzeret. What are the 3? Besukkah, velulav, venisuch hamayim. There's, mitzvah yeshiva besukkah all 7 days. You're mechuyav to dwell in the sukkah. You have to live in the sukkah. There is the mitzvah of Arba Minim, 7 days of the Chag. Now, we mentioned already this before, of Makom HaMikdash, right, Begvulin, but there is 7 days of the mitzvah of Lulav. And Shmini Atzeret, there is no mitzvah of Lulav. V'nisuch hamayim, we mentioned already also that every day of the Chag, they would do Nisuch hamayim. Now, every day of the year, they would have Nisuch hayayin, usually after Korban Tamid Shel Shachar. There are 2 constant korbanot, Tamid Shel Shachar, Tamid Shel Ben Ha'arbayim, right? And after Tamid Shel Shachar, they would do Nisuch Hayayin every day of the year, basically, right? Now, the 7 days of Chag HaSukkot would be also an additional Nisuch, pouring of water that they would go. It was the whole Simchat B'T HaShoeva that we have now, Simchat HaShoeva, every night of Chag HaSukkot, until the morning was a tremendous simcha, as we'll see in the Gemara coming up, and dancing and singing, an amazing scene, to the degree that the Gemara says, anyone that didn't see Simchat B'T HaShoeva, lo ra'a simcha mi'avav. You don't know what simcha means if you haven't seen Simchat B'T HaShoeva. So in case you think you know what simcha means, you gotta still hang in there, wait for Mashiach to come to see Simchat B'T HaShoeva. But they would go in the wee hours of the night, before the morning, they would go to this special place. They had a golden vessel. They would draw water, and they bring it to Sharamayim. They would pour it, and the Kohen would take it up the kevesh, would go on the left, and would put it in a from that vessel, would put it into a silver vessel, and would put it there up the mizbach next to the other silver vessel that was for Nisuch HaYayin, and they would do Nisuch HaBayim. That's only for the 7 days of Chag HaSukkot. Shmini Atzeret, there's no Nisuch HaBayim anymore, right? So those are 3 criterias of Chag HaSukkot that we find only in the 7 days of Chag HaSukkot, and in all of the 7 days of Chag, but you don't have it on Shmini Atzeret. Rabbi Yehuda Amar, Belo Gaya Menasech Kol Shemona. According to Rabbi Yehuda, we had actually Nisuch HaMayim even on Shmini Atzeret. So, okay, so according to Rabbi Yehuda, we have only 2 differences. Harei Chaluk Bebet Devarim. You have 2 major differences. You don't have Sukkah, you don't have Lulav on Shmini Atzeret. Again, 2 defining factors of Chag HaSukkot. So the Gemara says, wait a second, if you want to find differences, I could find differences between the first half of Pesach and the second half of Pesach as well. Shvi Pesach nami arech haluk ba'achilat matzah. Shvi Pesach, there's no mitzvah of eating matzah. And I guess in parentheses we could add also the maror and all the mitzvah. Arba kosod, that's the Rabbanan, right? Maror is the Oraita. Korban Pesach is the Oraita. So you can see add all of those inside. The Gemara says, Da'amar Mor, as we know, Laila Rishona Chova Mikan Ve'elach Reshut. The first night of Chag Pesach is an obligation of Ba'erev Tochlu Matzot, right? That the evening of the 14th going to 15th of Nisan, you must eat matzah. That's obligation. But that's the only obligatory eating matzah during Pesach. So you see that the 7th day of Pesach is different than the first day of Pesach, because first day of Pesach you have to eat matzah, right? Slash maror, Korban Pesach. But this 7th day, the Yom Tov Acharon, Shol Pesach, you don't have a mitzvah of eating matzah. So the differences you can find, right? Good question. Correct? No, says the Gemara. That's the difference, says the Gemara. You're not thinking. Hatam milayla chaluk miyom eno chaluk. There, the difference is only, it's a very specific mitzvah. It's not a mitzvah of the first half of Pesach. It's the first night of Pesach. It's very defined and specifically designed for the night of Pesach. The morning of Pesach, Yom Tov Rishon, there's no mitzvah of eating matzah. The 7 days of upcoming, the 6 upcoming days is no mitzvah to eat matzah. It's a very, very defined mitzvah of the night of Pesach. Korban Pesach is the same thing. Maror is the same thing. The morning, if you missed Korban Pesach, you can't eat it in the morning. If you missed eating matzah at night, you can't eat it in the morning. It's not a mitzvah of the first half of Chag HaPesach. It's a mitzvah of the first night of Pesach. That's it. The rest of Pesach, there's no mitzvah of eating matzah. Here, the mitzvah is during the day. Lulav is during the day. Nisuch HaMayim is during the day. And of course, Sukkah is night, day, the whole thing. Says the Gemara, Ravina Amar, Ze Chaluk Mishelefanav, Ze Chaluk Mishelifnefanav. Ravina said a different knetch, a different difference. He says, by Chag HaPesach, when it gets to Shvi Shel Pesach, it's 0 difference between Shvi Shel Pesach and the day before that, the 6th day of Pesach. Right? Shvi Shel Pesach, there's no mitzvah of eating matzah. Well, there's a mitzvah of eating seudah, but there's no mitzvah of eating matzah. Right? And 6th day is also like that. There's no difference between the Shvi Shel Pesach and the day before. The only difference is the Shvi Shel Pesach maybe to the beginning of the Pesach. But by Chag HaSukkot, there is Sukkah, and then there is Shmini Atzeret. Every single day of Chag HaSukkot, you have to sit in the Sukkah, dwell in the Sukkah. You have to bring Nisuch HaMayim, right? You have to do the Lulav and Etrog, right? So you have the 7 days different than the 8th day. Whereas over here, it's a thing of Yom Tov. The Chol HaMoed, so to speak, of Pesach, there is no mitzvah that's different than the last day of Pesach. So therefore, drop your difference. The difference that we say that requires Shehyanu of its own on Shemini Atzeret is because it is completely a different Chag. Up until now, you had Sukkah, you had Lulav, you had Nisuch HaMayim, and now you just don't have any of that. It's a completely different Chag. Whereas in Pesach, let alone the first night of Pesach, put that aside, the whole Pesach is the same. Right? There's no newness in the mitzvot of the Chag. So says the Gemara. The Gemara says now you find this is pretty nice. Gemara finds in the languages of the Psukim nuanced language that actually says this, spells this out, that Shemini Atzeret is its own Chag. Listen to this. This is beautiful. Haka Ketiv Par. Hatam Ketiv Parim. Over here by Shemini Atzeret, there's only Par Echad. Right? There's only one Korban. By Chag HaSukkot, by the 7 days prior to Shemini Atzeret, it says Parim because there was lots and lots of bulls that they would be brought on Chag HaSukkot. What actually is going to say later on, how all of the Umot HaOlam, all of the nations of the world, would be protected through the Korbanot, that we brought Korbanot for every nation in the world. It says, if the Goyim knew what the Bet HaMikdash meant for them, they would put guards around it and protect it because it would protect them. We'll bring 70 bulls. How does the Cheshbon? The Cheshbon is the first day of Chag HaSukkot, we would bring 13. The second would be 12. It would be a descending order, but one less every day. So it would start from 13 and end with 7. Right? So you add all of those together, 13 plus 12 plus 11 plus 10 plus 9 plus 8 plus 7 will be 70. Right? And then from 7 you drop to 1. It certainly doesn't follow. It says par. Now over there you have parim. Over here you have par. Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak Amar, Hacha Ketiv Bayom, Hatam Ketiv Ubayom. By Shemini Atzeret it says Bayom HaShemini. Listen to the pasuk. Aseret Yelachem. It's a new pasuk. There's no Vav HaChibur. There's no end in the 8th day, right? It's its own parsha, its own paragraph, its own pasuk. It's cut and dry, separate than the other ones. Whereas by all of the other ones, starting from the 2nd day and on, it's Ubayom HaSheni, Ubayom HaShelishi, Ubayom HaRevi'i, right? They're all connected, right? You do this the first day and the 2nd day is like this, and the 3rd day is like this, the 4th day is like that. It's all connected to one another as one continuous row, and then it cuts it. Instead of saying Ubayom HaShemini, there's no Vav. Bayom HaShemini. It's a separate thing. The indication in the language of the pasuk is pretty clear and telling. So says the Gemara. Rav Ashi said he's diuk. Amar hachaktiv kamishpat. By Shmini Atzeret he says kamishpat. When you bring the korbanot of Shmini Atzeret, you bring it kamishpat, like it's mishpat, like it's rules and halachot. By the 7 days, by the 7th day of Chag HaSukkot, it says kemishpatam. Kemishpatam means like the halachot of all the days prior, right? So you see the pasuk time and again puts the 7 days, the initial 7 days together, and then cuts it and has the 8th day separately. So it's not just that the mitzvot are different. Even the language of the pasuk is pretty clear that the 8th day of Chag HaSukkot is to be separate and to be dealt with by its own. So says Gemara, now we just went through the whole thing of proving the point of Rabbi Yochanan, who said Shemini Atzeret has Shehyanu, but the 7 days before is a different Chag, and Shemini Atzeret is a different Chag, but by Chag HaPesach, you don't have Shehyanu and Shvi Shel Pesach, right? That was the point of Rabbi Yochanan. So says the Gemara, Lema mesayale. Maybe we could bring a proof from a braita like this. Haparim ha'elim va'kvasim makvin zedze. We brought number of korbanot during the Chag, and says the braita, they are ma'akev zedze. Meaning, if you have to bring 13 bulls, and you only have 12 today, don't have 13. Can you altogether bring the bulls or not? Right? And they had elim and kivasim also. On 7 days of Pesach, of Chag Sukkot, every day they would bring 2 elim, right? They would bring 2 elim and 14 kivasim. Right? 2 rams and 14 lambs. On Shmini Atzeret, as we'll see in just a moment, they will bring 1 ayil and 7 kvasim. Half, right? 50% discount. We have one ram and 7 lambs. So the question is, if I don't have enough korbanot, are they going to be ma'akev zedze? Are they going to be not possible for them to be brought? I only have 12 instead of 13 bulls today. Can I bring the 12 that I have? Or do I not bring the whole thing all together? So says the Braita, the parim, the bulls, the elim, the rams, vakvasim, the lambs, makvin zedze. They are makev zedze. If you don't have one, you can't bring the others. The Rabbi Yehuda Omer, parim en makvin zedze. Rabbi Yehuda says no. By lambs and by rams, I agree. But by parim, I don't agree. In other words, if I have to bring two ayils, 2 rams, and I only have 1, you can't bring the 1 even. But if I have to bring 13 bulls and I only have 12, you could bring it. Why? Says Rabbi Yehuda, because the number of bulls are not set. Today is 13, tomorrow is 12, the day after is going to be 11, after that it's going to be 10. Anyways, they are descending, changing, diminishing number. So, therefore, the number is not the biggest deal. If you have what you have, you bring what you have. Says the Gemara. Because the bulls, they're going to be mitba'et ve'olech. Anyways, the number changes every day. Amru lo, they told Rabbi Yehuda, ve'alo kulan mitba'atin ve'olchin. So wait a second, all of them are mitba'et ve'olech. Why? Because it's correct that the 7 initial days of Chag Sukkot, you have to bring 2 rams and 14 lambs, but the 8th day, all of a sudden it diminishes. It becomes half. That also is diminishing. Because kulan mitma'atin ve'olchin b'shmini. All of them are going to be diminishing and going down in numbers on the 8th day. Rabbi Yehuda answers to them, Amar lahen, wait a second. Who spoke about Shmini? We talk about Chag Sukkot. Shmini is its own Chag, right? Shemini regel bifnei atzmo, he says to them. So therefore, in Chag Sukkot, in the 7 days of Chag Sukkot, the elim and the kvasim, the rams and the lambs, are not diminishing. So therefore, those are going to be makiv. Those are going to be a set number. You can't bring less than that. This is the line that we need. We brought this whole braita for this last line of it to prove the point of Rabbi Yochanan that you need Birkat Shehyanu for Shemini Atzeret. Listen to this. All 7 days of Chag Sukkot, Teunim Korban, they need Korban, their own Korban. Shir, the Leviim would be singing and playing music that is miyuchad for what was happening then. Ubracha, this is it. We are thinking as of right now, the bracha means, what bracha? Shehyanu, right? Velina, and also Lina. What's Lina? Lina is that at the Motzai Chag, they had to stay in Yerushalayim, right? What happens if you invite your son-in-law your daughter-in-law for the Chag, and then the moment they say Havdalah, they're looking at their watch, and then they say Havdalah, already the car is outside waiting, and like, you know, right? You run away. Well, how do you feel about that? So it's the same thing. In Yerushalayim, the Motzai Chag, you have to stay. You can't just leave. It's disrespectful. You have to stay until the morning after, right? So that's called lina. That on Motzai Chag you stay, you sleep in Yerushalayim, then you could go. Af Shemini, says the Braita, the eighth day also needs korban, its own korban, shir, its own song, ubracha, its own bracha, velina. It also needs lina. That means Motzai Shemini, going into Tshi, you have to also sleep in Yerushalayim, and then you could leave. So says the Gemara, my love zman. When we say it needs its own bracha, why wouldn't we suggest that this is talking about zman? That means you say shehyanu, right? What other bracha is there? Says the Gemara, no. It's talking about Birkat Hamazon and Tefillah. That means in Tefillah, if you say Bayom Chag HaSukkot hazeh, ruined. You have to daven again, right? You can't say Chag HaSukkot. It's not Chag HaSukkot anymore. You have to say B'yom Shmini Chag HaSeret hazeh, right? Birkat Hamazon, when you say Ya'aleh v'yavo B'yom Shmini Chag HaSeret hazeh. That's what it means, bracha. Meaning the text of the brachot that you say now has to be changed from Chag HaSukkot to Shmini Chag HaSeret. Says the Gemara, Hachinami mistabra, and that makes sense. You know why? Because listen to what he just said. We just said, literally just said, that all 7 days of Chag HaSukkot needs a bracha. Well, you say Shehyanu every single day of the Chag? Right? You perhaps didn't pay attention. Take a look at 2 lines up from the bottom of the Amud. Right? All of the Shekeshem, Sheshiv'at Yemei Chag, all 7 days of the Chag, Te'unin bracha. They need bracha. Well, you say Shehyanu every single day of the 7 days of the Chag? Absolutely not. You say Shehyanu once, right? So says the Gemara. So it means Tefillah. Tefillah, of course, you're davening every day of the Chag. Birkat Hamazon, you're saying Birkat Hamazon every day of the Chag. You say Chag HaSukkot hazeh, right? So that's very sensible to say that this is only talking about Birkat Hamazon and Tefillah, right? Mara says, okay, that's not such a proof. Mara says, if you say this means Shechianu, not Tefillah and Birkat Hamazon, Kol Shiv'a Mi'ika, you have Shechianu every single day of the 7 days? Of course not. Mara says, no, that's not such a big kasha. Halo kasha. The ilo barich ha'idna mevarich. Lemachar. That if you didn't say what it means is, if you didn't say Shechianu yet, you could say Shechianu the second day also. You didn't miss it. If for whatever reason you forgot to say Shechianu the first day of Chag HaSukkot, what happens? Well, you missed Shechianu? No, you could say it the second day. Miss second day, you remember the third day? You say third day. Up until 7th day of Chag HaSukkot, if you haven't said Shechianu yet, you still say Shechianu. That's what he means.
Does that apply for Pesach?
If it would apply to this, it would apply to Pesach as well. Right? So says the Gemara, or any day of the 7 days. Mikol Makom, Gemara says, wait a second, but that's not so applicable because Mikol Makom kos ba'inan. There is a takana, as we'll see in just a moment, this is machloket. There's a takana that you have to say Shehyanu, not just get up, you get excited about the Chag, and say Shehyanu, you have to have a cup of wine. A cup of wine was not like nowadays that you go to a distributor and it's just a matter of how much money you want to pay, what quality of wine. Well, it was a rare commodity. So every day of the Chag you have just a cup of wine? It's not an easy thing to find. Says the Gemara. Mikol makom kos ba'inan. Lema v'sayah le Rab Nachman amar Rab Nachman zeman omro afilu b'shuk. So maybe this is a support to the Shita of Rab Nachman. The Rab Nachman disagrees with this whole cup of wine business. Says no, Shechianu, you could say it even in the marketplace. You remember that he didn't say Shechianu on Chag HaSukkot, and you're so excited to see Chag HaSukkot. He says Shechianu even in the marketplace. right? You don't have to be by your table with a cup of wine saying Kiddush. The Abrat Bayin and Kos, because if you say we need a cup of wine, Kos Kol Yom Amika, you have every day you have a cup of wine. That's somebody actually saw an heirloom from Chafetz Chaim that was passed down the generations, the Kiddush cup, the Becher of the Chafetz Chaim himself, right? Can you imagine how valuable that would be? Right? Chafetz Chaim said Kiddush in this every Shabbat. And the person was so uncomfortable, looks at this like tiny little shot glass, right? He said, Chafetz Chaim said, wine, thing on this? He said, yeah, because we didn't have wine. He had made a cup that was the smallest shear possible because no one could afford more wine. A little 1/3 of an ounce made all the difference in people's budget, right? We can't even relate to that. But that's how it was. So, kos kol yom amika dilma leiklale. Because the Gemara says, no, that's not a kasha. Because what we're saying is very simple. What we're saying is that if you happen to forget Shehyanu, and you happen to have a cup of wine, you can say Shehyanu second day, third day, fourth day, fifth, sixth, seventh day. Doesn't make a difference. That's what he's trying to say. So therefore, the Gemara basically goes back and forth to discuss if this bracha is Shehyanu, if this is a proof for Rabbi Yochanan that you would say Shehyanu on Shemini Atzeret, because what else could bracha mean? And the Gemara said, no, not necessarily. It could mean Birkat HaMazon and Tefillah. The Gemara wanted to say it's clear that's Birkat HaMazon and Tefillah. The Gemara said, no, it's not so clear. But be as it may, at the end of the day, we don't have a proof for Rabbi Yochanan. Rabbi Yochanan said his thing that Shemini Atzeret has Shehyanu. We'll get to that, Naskana of that later on. But for now, we're just going to jump on one last piece of this Rabbi Yehuda. We just learned Derech Agav that Rabbi Yehuda said Shemini Ta'un Lina, right? He said even on Shemini Atzeret, Motzei Shemini Atzeret, you can't run away. You have to sleep in Yerushalayim, right? And then morning you can leave. Says the Gemara, V'sava Rabbi Yehuda Shemini Ta'un Lina. Really? Rabbi Yehuda holds that you have to stay Lina after Shemini Atzeret? V'hatanya, we learned the Braita. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Yehuda himself says, Minai lePesach Sheni she'eno ta'un lina. Says Rabbi Yehuda, Pesach Sheni does not need lina. In other words, if you were tameh during Pesach Rishon, right, you get a next try from the Torah, right? People who were tameh came to Moshe and said, Lama nigara, why we should be less? And HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave them a second chance, the 14th of Iyar, right? You're going to have Pesach Sheni. Says Rabbi Yehuda, when Pesach Sheni you do it, do you have to also have Lina or not? Pesach Sheni is not 7 days, it's 1 day, right? So you bring Pesach Sheni, do you have to also sleep in Yerushalayim the night after, or can you just leave? So says Rabbi Yehuda, doesn't need Lina, Pesach Sheni. How do I know? Shenemar, as the pasuk says, "Upanita baboker ve'alachta le'oalecha." The source for lina, the source that you know that you can't just leave at night and you have to stay until the morning is "Upanita baboker ve'alachta le'oalecha." You turn around in the morning and you go home, right? And you can't turn around at night. You have to wait the night. Uchtiv. And it says, it's juxtaposed, this pasuk with Sheshet Yamim Tochal Matzot, the 6 days of Chol HaMoed, after the Yom Tov, that you are eating matzah. Now again, this is Devarim Tetzayin Zayin and Devarim Tetzayin Chet. Mamash juxtaposed, one after the other. The first pasuk says, ובשלת ואכלת במקום אשר יבחר השם אלוקיך בו ופנית בבוקר והלכת לאוהליך. Right? The end tale of Chag HaPesach. And then it says, ששת ימים תאכל מצות וביום השביעי עצרת להשם אלוקיך לא תעשה מלאכה. Right? So you see, this is following 6 days of first initial days of Pesach, and then the 7th day, and then only then you have to stay the night. Indicating that any time that you don't have 6 days of Chol HaMoed, a long Moed, you don't have the mitzvah of lina either, says Rabbi Yehuda. Therefore, et sheta'un shisha ta'un lina, whatever needs 6 days of moed prior, then the Yom Tov needs lina, et she'eno ta'un shisha, but Pesach Sheni, that doesn't have that, it's just a 1 day thing, then eno ta'un lina. It doesn't need for you to sleep and then leave in the morning. You could already leave at night. Lema'utemai, says Gemara, what is this coming to exclude? My love, lema'ute nami shmini shel chag. Maybe it's coming to also exclude Shmini Atzeret of Chag HaSukkot, because Shmini Atzeret doesn't have 6 days, it's only 1 day. Right? So maybe Shmini Atzeret, you'll see from this Rabbi Yehuda itself that you don't need Shmini Atzeret to sleep at night and leave in the morning. But we just said on top of the Amud that Rabbi Yehuda holds that Shmini Atzeret needs lina. So it's a head-on collision between two Rabbi Yehudas. Tira mineh ubeh. Rabbi Yehuda on the top of Sukkah Mem Zayin Amud Bet said that on Shmini Atzeret, when you finish the Chag on Motzei Shmini Atzeret, you have to stay the night. You have to sleep there and then in the morning you could go. Rabbi Yehuda said in regards to Pesach Sheni that you don't have to stay. Pesach Sheni you could just leave at night. Because there's no 6 days before. Well, guess what else there's no 6 days before? Shmini Atzeret. So that would come out, Rabbi Yehuda saying that you don't need to stay the night, and on top we said you do need to stay the night. So says the Gemara, why wouldn't we say that this is a stira in Rabbi Yehuda? The Gemara says, lo, l'ma'oteh Pesach Sheni. It's only talking about Pesach. Because the Pasuk is saying the Pesach that I want you to sleep, the main Yom Tov is Pesach Rishon. Pesach Sheni, you don't have to stay the night. It's just the makeover, right? But other Yamim Tovim, that is not a makeover, it's the actual Yom Tov of Shmini Atzeret, of course you have to stay the night. So it's not really a stira. The Kvateh, Pesach Sheni the Kvateh, Hachanami Mistabra, and that is very sensible, says the Gemara. Ditnan, as we learned, Habikurim, Teunim Korban, Veshir, Vetenufa, Velina. We see that this, the Gemara is going to prove, I just realized we're out of time, the Gemara is going to pick this up, that you see that this mitzvah of lina is not just with Chag Pesach, but it's on other Yamim Tovim as well, and that is the Shita of Rabbi Yehuda, as we'll discuss and explore Be'ezrat Hashem in the next shiur.